So now I'm going to introduce Ambassador Vladimir Astapenka, who is the former ambassador from Belarus to Argentina. I'm going to introduce him, but before he speaks, I'll be showing a short video on recent events in Belarus. Ambassador Vladimir Arkadievich Astapenka was the ambassador of Belarus to Argentina from 2018 to 2020. He is the author of more than 50 scientific and academic publications in the sphere of international law, European law, international relations, and higher education. He was a member of the governmental delegations of the Republic of Belarus to the UN General Assembly, ECOSOC, International Conference on the Law of the Sea, OSCE, and Council of Europe. And he resigned from his post as ambassador in October of this year on the day of Alexander Lukashenko's inauguration. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce Ambassador Vladimir Astapenka.
Well, thank you, Helen, for this very emotional video. You never told me that you were going to put it. And I wish this video could be supported with the translation of the very strong words that were presented in Russian. But the main idea of that was that we are flying while we are bitten, but we will be going out to the squares, million of us, in the fight for freedom. And that's exactly what's happening in my country. I'm really thankful to you for the invitation to be part of this panel. I listened with very great interest to the presentations of my colleague panelists, and my talking points would be, I would say, more practical than theory oriented. Although I believe that the situation that we are having in Belarus presents a big challenge, both to the international law, to the regional international law, to public order that we'll try to establish all over the world. And this happens in the situation when our country, as you may know, is not a disputed territory, because it's a sovereign country established in 1991 with no territorial disputes with its neighbors, although it had its own very complicated history. I would not go into these details. It's a country that has no internal or international military conflicts and has never been involved in the international military conflicts. We considered it till recently as the net donor to the regional security and stability. It is a country that has no difficulties with the so-called Russian world, with the Russian language, or with the Russian culture, or with the Russian citizens, because we are the country where we established two state languages, Russian and Belarusian. And I believe that now we are at a certain stage, at a point where we need to support more Belarusian language than Russian, because Russian language is dominating in this country. But the current political crisis has nothing to do with all of that. And maybe I would try to explain a little bit briefly the history or the background of it, because you started your video from 96. Basically, we should recalculate our newest history from 94, when the current president Lukashenko won the presidential elections by wide margin. And since that time, he is basically has been losing his popularity, but always managed to win all the subsequent elections, which were briefly shown in this video as well, introducing very specific techniques and procedure to the electoral process, and always putting all the candidates for the presidential post under either criminal or administrative pressure. All the previous elections were widely criticized by the international community, by the OSCE, by the European Union, by the United States. But the general presumption was that Lukashenko still managed to gain the majority of the votes. But 6 months ago, when we had another round of the presidential elections, they turned out to be quite a different case, because we believe that that was the moment when the Belarusian nation woke up and demonstrated their readiness to actively participate in the election process and to support alternative candidates and support the movement to the democratic change. Unfortunately, this awakening, let's say, of the nation immediately was met by the brutal and massive repressions from the current regime. It was evident that the voters, the citizens of Belarus massively voted against Lukashenko. And there are many documents and reports to prove that. But the official announcement of the results of this elections, according to which Lukashenko got 80% of support, stunned all the nations. And that was the starting point of a peaceful protest, really peaceful protest, which has been maintained for already 6 long months. By that moment, we could state that we have falsified elections and stolen votes. Main candidates for the president post were either jailed or forced in exile with the criminal charges against them. Members of the Coordination Council, which was set up right after the elections for the political dialogue with the authorities, are facing criminal charges for the attempt to undermine the constitutional order. Peaceful demonstrations are organized for practically every day during the 6 months. At the peak points, the massive Sunday people's marches reached the number of 300,000, 350,000 of the participants. In response to the peaceful protests, the authorities used brutal force, and law enforcement, so-called, as we call them now, say, law enforcement units used all kinds of special equipment, military equipment against the protesters, and very unhuman treatment. Unfortunately, we have to speak about the casualties, and one of them was clearly shown in the video. We have up to 10 persons dead during the process, killed basically during the process. 6 are still missing. More than 1,000 cases, well-documented cases of tortures. More than 35,000 persons detained and fined for the participation in the so-called unauthorized massive events. Around 250 political prisoners, 500 journalists were arrested as well for taking part in these events, although they did their job. We've got recent information that the judges condemned the protesters for 38 years of imprisonment. It's like 15,000 days that the protesters already served back in 2020 for their actions provoked by the falsified elections and for their demands to have a possibility to elect our own leaders without fear of being repressed or punished. As you may know, the results of these last elections were not recognized by the European Union, by the UK, by the USA, Canada, and other European countries. But China and Russia did not doubt the official results and congratulated Lukashenko with the victory. Since then, Putin has been sticking to this position and helping politically and economically to the regime of Lukashenko, although we should mention that there is some pressure from Russia to move the political system of the country to the new constitutional reform that could finally bring another round of presidential elections, and then maybe a new public or political figure could substitute Lukashenko. In the opposition forces, we do not like this perspective, and for us, it is clear that Russia is facing very big challenges in this situation because the protests of Belarus are still going on. And if we come back to the general principles of the international law and to the obligation of the state to observe human rights, it is evident that in case of Belarus, we are speaking about massive and systematic human rights violations. In case of real politics, the Russia faces as well a challenge because for the moment it is supporting the regime, but at the same time, the Russian analysts note with preoccupation that the percentage of the population in Belarus that used to be in favor of close relations between Belarus and Russia is diminishing very quickly. And it's still a big question how Russian authorities would plan to maintain the links between their country and Belarus when in this very complicated situation, Belarusians didn't receive any help or any support from part of the official Russia. I like the term that was used by our panelist, Thomas Deval, selective fashion. Maybe that's what is happening now in Belarus vis-a-vis Russia participation or influence in this event. We do realize that Belarus largely depends on Russia when it comes to the energy resources, raw materials. Most of our export still is destined to Russia, but still we believe that at some points, crucial points in the history, the country should recall all the general principles of international law and the values of human rights that need to be supported worldwide. And the exclusions from this rule would never bring us to the peaceful and stable future. So I may imagine that in case of Belarus, the West and Russia would have sort of a conflicting point, because on the one side, for example, we have Belarus Democracy Act adopted last December by the Congress of the USA. And there we read explicitly the preoccupation of the American congressman about the independence and sovereignty of Belarus. and even the threat of some sanctions against Russia and Russian officials if they would decide to go along this way. On the other hand, we have rather intense legal base between Belarus and Russia, starting from from the treaty on the union state between Belarus and Russia, then the treaty on the Euro-Asian Economic Union, and coming back to a treaty on collective defense. Although Putin basically rejected the attempts of Lukashenko to resort to the provisions of the Treaty on the Collective Defense against the background of the peaceful process, still it looks like the Russian authorities are determined to make some pressure and to use the intensify integrity rhetoric. For example, proposing to Belarus at the moment to consider signing roadmaps for a single currency or for special joint ventures that could finally pass the property on the Belarusian enterprises to Russian hands. So trying to conclude, I believe we are at a very crucial crossroad where we have a very big contradiction between the position of the people of Belarus and the, as we call it, illegitimate regime of Lukashenko. We believe that this contradiction should be resolved as soon as possible, and it would be beneficial to all the neighbors of Belarus, all the regional partners of Belarus. And we do believe that we should look for decisions, for solutions in this situation with the help of international partners, with the reference to the international law, and with the understanding that these general human values could and should be supported by all interested parties. We do not exclude neither European Union nor Russia from these procedures, and we expect that we will be able to find a solution soon. Well, thank you once again for this video, which was touched me very deeply, and I am available for any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us and for your for sharing your personal experiences. I wonder if I could just, before I actually turn to the other questions and answers, if I could just have a follow-up to ask if you could speak a little to sort of the status of the opposition at the moment, Tikhanovskaya, and what the opposition, which I think largely is in exile, essentially, in Poland is doing, and if there's any sort of prospects for resolving the situation.
Well, thank you for the question. I would start from the Coordination Council, which was set up in Minsk on the 18th of August, basically 9 days after the election, by the initiative of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, former candidate to the presidential post. And very important, I would stress, very important fact that this Coordination Council was recognized as the structure representing the democratic forces of Belarus by the decision of the European Parliament, and as well by this Belarus Democracy Act in the United States, which is very important and which is sort of a starting point for our work with international partners and our attempts to mobilize the international support for the democratic cause in Belarus. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, we've got recent reports who says that most probably she won the election with a 50.4% of the votes. Was forced to leave the country practically the next day after the election. She went to Vilnius, and well, it took her a couple of days to get back to her normal state, and she sort of headed her office and protest movement from there. She is facing criminal charges for undermining the constitutional order, but she's still fighting for her place in the. Well, she's already got her place in the history of Belarus, but she still is claiming her place as the interim president, I would call it, because her main election promise was to get to the power and with one only person's purpose to organize a new and fair elections for a new president. So she confirmed her determination to fulfill this task. She is not pretending to run for the presidency in the future, and so she is fighting for this right for the people to choose their democratic leader. Few days later, one of the leaders of the Coordination Council, Pavel Latushka, was forced as well to leave the country, being accused of the criminal charges. And in this time, he went to Warsaw. So he set up in Warsaw a team of experts, which was called National Anti-Crisis Management. That was the decision of the Coordination Council and Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, to prepare for the transition period, let's say, and to be able to ensure the smooth and peaceful transition period between the moment Lukashenko resigns till the new presidential election. So these are two main teams of opposition that are functioning for the moment from abroad. We have already Valery Tsepkalo as well, a former candidate for the president post, and his staff in Riga. Tsepkalo as well is facing criminal charges. So that's the third point of opposition. And what is more important, at the end of January, in spite of all the quarantine restrictions that we have in Europe for the moment, we managed to have a meeting of all three teams, following which we announced the strategy and the plans for the opposition and for the people inside of Belarus, which is called Spring 2021 or Victory Plan. So we announced these plans to mobilize the protest activity within Belarus, to mobilize international support from outside of Belarus. And we expect that these announced actions would be very crucial and instrumental in our further fight for the better future for the country. So here we are, and we would be very glad to have any kind of support that you or the international community could offer under the present circumstances.
Thank you so much. And we're with you, and we'll try to support in any way that we can.